I am so excited to bring together two outstanding legal leaders today, Milana McCullagh, head of legal at Reddit, and Iris Chen, vice president, deputy general counsel at Airbnb, who will share their insights and experiences on scaling legal teams at some of the most iconic companies in the world today. So we want to keep this event interactive. So if you have questions, feel free to use the ask question feature on Zoom. It should be somewhere in the bottom there somewhere, and ask your questions. And we'll try our best to get to them as we go through the discussion. Okay, so I will pass it over now to Milana and Iris to introduce themselves. Milana, would you like to start?
Oh, hi everyone. How are you? It's so nice to be here. I'm right now just up in the Pacific Northwest, up in Washington State on the eastern side. So that's where I'm calling in from. So let me start with my background, and then I'll hand it over to Iris to go. Um, I joined Google back in 2007 after a few years at Wilson Sonsini in the San Francisco Bay Area. And at Google, I was part of the original product council team and did the rounds of many of the products at Google, and landed working for Iris, who was my manager for many, many years, counseling ads. After Google, I moved over to Coinbase in mid 2020. And the goal there was to build out a big tech product and commercial counsel function and scale quickly and support a really fast growing product and commercial teams. And then I moved over to Reddit last January, where I'm leading the legal team under our chief legal officer. And let me hand it over to Iris to do a quick intro, and then I can kind of go into my challenge here.
Thanks, Milana. It's great to be doing this with Milana. I always love an excuse to chat with her. So hi, everyone. I'm Iris Chen. As Rad mentioned, I'm VP and Deputy General Counsel at Airbnb. I started as a corporate lawyer in New York at firms like Simpson Thacher and Ropes and Gray. And I joined Google back in 2006 in their New York office. I was the third attorney hired there. And I started out as a commercial attorney supporting their ads business in North America. So working with a lot of their sales teams in the field, and eventually, started to manage the commercial team that supported the ads business and worked on acquisitions like YouTube and DoubleClick. And that role eventually expanded to include overseeing the product council that worked on ads, which is how Milana and I came to work together. And then I think through various organizational changes, both on the business side and in legal, my responsibilities kind of expanded over time into other Google product areas like search, maps, payments, e-commerce, health and research. So a lot of the kind of products that Google is very well known for with consumers. And I think, I started with a team of 6 people when I first became a manager at Google. By the time I left, 14 plus years later, the team was about 150 people across, different geos and across many of those different product areas. But in 2020, I kind of decided it was time for change. So I landed at Airbnb and, height of the pandemic. And I was brought in to head up their product and marketing legal teams, which at Airbnb encompasses product engineering, design and marketing, as well as supply, quality, and growth, kind of what many people might think of as revenue or go-to-market functions, strategic partnerships, comms, PR, new business initiatives, trademark, copyright, brand protection, as well as our nonprofit Airbnb.org. So it's a pretty broad portfolio of stuff. The team, when I started, was about 22, primarily based in the Bay Area. And it's been 4 years almost. And so the team has now grown to about 50 folks full-time, as well as some contractors. We are fully remote still. And so the team is spread across many different cities, but primarily Bay Area, New York, LA, and Portland. And then some additional responsibilities that, I've taken on are, all of commercial transactions, product development for trust and safety, as well as our community support functions. And the company's changed quite a bit too. It's now moved to a twice a year kind of product launch cycle. So we'll talk a little bit about some of that later, but how Airbnb now operates is very different than it was when I started. So how to kind of adapt the team and scale support for that has been a challenge for me. So with that, I think we're gonna kind of dive into why you are all here. I don't know, Milana, if you want to kind of go into the first question.
Yeah, I think so first, I noticed a bunch of friends join. So hi friends, you know who you are. It's really nice to see you. So last time we did this a couple of years ago and it was super fun. So that's why we both agreed to do this again. We talked about, how to manage legal support in a hyper growth environment. It was a very 2021 type challenge. And I believe our informal name for this panel last time was how to build a legal team in 101 days. So here today, we're talking more about how do you scale and build legal teams. Before I go to the question to Iris, I'll just talk a little bit about, one of the challenge at Reddit, which was very different than the hypergrowth challenge that I faced previously. And that's really how to ensure public company readiness and scale legal support in a much more carefully operated companies. And when I started, we had a couple of gaps due to attrition and business need, including on the commercial side, corporate, and there was limited legal and organizational processes in place. And obviously, public company readiness was really a key priority for us. We just went public, as I'm sure most of you have heard, back in April, and our readiness efforts were already top of mind when I joined last year. So now, so going into sort of our first question, when Iris and I left Google, we had to get up to speed quickly in order to start moving some big rocks early on. So Iris, where do you begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think very basic, it's really just important to spend time, I would say, actively listening, reflecting, and planning. And this applies to any situation you find yourself in where you've got a new challenge or a different challenge, not just like a new role, like the ones that Milana and I found ourselves in. For example, I think at Airbnb, I spent the first month or two of my time there on back-to-back Zoom calls, just meeting people, asking questions, just figuring out, what their roles were and doing my own sort of 360 assessment of the situation. So that I could really understand what I needed to do with my team in order to meet their needs of the business. And I think, one of the things I always tell people is you need to understand the operating system of the organization that you're in. And, what are the various functions involved? What do they do? How do they work together? How do they intersect? And then, same thing within the legal department too, like many legal departments, Google and Airbnb, and I'm sure Reddit and Coinbase, you have a lot of different teams who have different, responsibilities and scope. And so understanding what those are and where the swim lanes are for those is really important. At Airbnb, when I first joined, I quickly realized that the commercial function was spread out among different teams. Whereas I was kind of used to a model at Google where, commercial support for ads was all on my team. And I found that, it required more time for teams who had common terms in their forms to coordinate and make sure like we were consistent in fallbacks and kind of how we were drafting language at Airbnb. And so, one of the things that eventually happened was bringing all of the commercial work onto my team. But in order to do that, I needed to spend a lot of time getting to know the work, understanding where the friction points were, understanding the people involved, And it's not a change that happened overnight. I needed to do that homework first before making a case for bringing those teams together. So I think that's a good example of where, you know, that initial work of understanding the operating system can pay off eventually. And, you know, also just understanding, you know, the organization so that you can navigate it, especially for those of you who are leading or managing teams. Like that's one of your main responsibilities is to, you know, and value adds is to help your team navigate the organization and remove challenges and remove the rocks that are in the way. And you can't do that unless you understand how to do that yourself, understand who you need to like have in your network in order to make that happen for folks.
Yeah, I agree. You need observation, a time, like, and figure out where the gaps are. It's really hard to do since many of us are action oriented and A-type and want to jump in right away. And in both my last two roles, I spent the first month really prioritizing getting to know folks and doing introductions. At Reddit, I spent time, you know, the company is mostly remote, but I did fly down to San Francisco and spend time meeting folks who are in the office there. And you can't get a good understanding of a company, I think, if you're not listening and paying attention. Some other just thoughts, like what works at one company might not work at another. I think that this has been my hardest lesson over the last year and a half. You know, Reddit is an old company in tech time frames and has a very particular way and longstanding way of doing things, and not as open to switching things up as Coinbase was. Coinbase was very, and still is, like a very, you know, hyper growth type company and is open to experiments. And, you know, I had a couple of moments where I wanted to switch things up earlier on and learned that you know, I needed to be more patient, and my approach couldn't be cookie cutter. Like what worked for me there couldn't necessarily work for me here. And sometimes your well-laid plans to, you know, reflect and spend the first 30 days or 60 days meeting folks goes astray, and you need to roll with that. So 2 weeks into my new role at Reddit, Reddit faced a significant security incident, which was, you know, well publicized at the time, and it was a sophisticated phishing attempt, and which meant I needed to dive in a whole lot sooner than anticipated. And I happened to be in the office in San Francisco, so spent a whole bunch of time really, you know, rolling up my sleeves and learning about the company very quickly, you know, what worked well, what processes were missing, and also helped to immediately prove my value because because I had to jump in and help manage the situation.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be agile and, like you said, be willing to kind of adapt and change course if needed. You know, so we've kind of talked about, you know, not rushing to action, taking the time to listen and gather information as kind of like the foundation. But once you've done that, you know, what's next? And, you know, Milana, you mentioned in describing your role at Coinbase and Reddit, you know, you had these immediate priorities of building out a team and addressing gaps, but also like dealing with these fire drills that were coming up unexpectedly. How did you translate that into actionable like next steps?
Yeah. So when we last did this call, you know, as I mentioned, I was at Coinbase, and this had a very different, you know, growth and employee strategy than Reddit, which was, it was in a hyper growth mode. The company size basically doubled when I was there, and I was expected to really quickly build a big team to meet those needs. And Reddit has very careful and managed growth. And also, since I'm managing the entire legal team, I really had to think holistically about the needs and filling the gaps. And so my first step always of team building is to assess talent and figure out what is needed, right? And I think the critical item is just ensuring you have trusted leads who I can delegate major work streams to. You cannot do it all yourself. You just can't. And so you need to have folks that are really strong under you. And my goal always is to either hire or develop talent and ensure that folks are better and smarter than me and can take on the lead on complex initiatives. And at Reddit, as I mentioned earlier, corporate and commercial areas were the main priorities since I had large gaps there, like due to attrition and also the business need. And especially on the corporate side, that was very much outside of my wheelhouse. I had never done corporate work before, and I didn't really quite know what was needed. And I had to dive in myself on a whole bunch of the corporate work streams, just because we just didn't have folks to do the work. And it was such a great learning experience and gave me a better sense of what I needed to hire for. Next, I look holistically at my team and just making sure that folks are in the right roles and where their skills and experience and interests lay. And I learned a lot of that from you and how you always manage team and think about career and you think about how your team is situated. And as part of that, you often also have to make the hard decision to make org changes and to better adapt to the company's needs. And my focus also always on org planning is not to organize around individuals, but instead really focus on what the company's needs are. And I know that's always harder, but I think it gets to a better outcome. One other thing I wanted to just touch upon is just remote hiring and team building. I've experienced this now twice. It is much more challenging, right? Like both like getting to know folks and also just team building and hiring generally. One thing that I really love to do, especially on the hiring side, and I learned this from Coinbase, is really doing presentations for more senior roles. And this is basically where candidates need to do a 30-minute presentation on a topic in front of a panel. And that just gives you so much insight into, when you can't do live interviews, it gives insight into presentation skills. And I took this over to Reddit with me, and I think it continues to be an extremely valuable tool. And then for existing team members, just getting to spend as much time in person with them, I think that is just key. You just can't do it otherwise. Iris, I knew you had a slightly different challenge when you started at Airbnb. You had flat headcount and you inherited a team that needed to be reorganized. So how did you build your team, and how have you had to adapt it over the years?
Yeah, as you mentioned, like I had flat headcount. The company had just gone through a major RIF because of the impact of COVID, and so I had to kind of work with what I had. And, one of the things I tried to do very quickly was prioritize was just kind of getting to know the work and getting to know the people. And so I spent a lot of time identifying projects to work with individuals on the team directly with, not just, working with my direct reports all the time and learning about things from them, but really kind of rolling up my sleeves and doing the work alongside team members on some key initiatives that I knew were impactful for the company. So for instance, our extenuating circumstances policy is a pretty important one for Airbnb. It governs like when Airbnb will kind of step in and cover guests and hosts for unforeseen cancellations. And so I had to within my first 2 weeks, work on a presentation for the executive team with somebody on my team who was working on that and just kind of whip that into shape. But also understand the policy, it was a great exercise for me. And then, I also was dealing with a lot of, there were people who were leaving. So there was attrition that I was dealing with. So I had backfills that I had to fill pretty quickly. I was able to bring in some talent from outside and also promote from within. So my leadership team or direct reports today looks very different than the team that I had inherited. And, one of the things that I think became very clear to me in that experience was just the importance of hiring general athletes. If you don't need specialized knowledge, let's say you're running a payments or a fintech, of course you need people who come in with that knowledge probably to be able to function well from the beginning. But I would say I get a lot of more mileage by handling or hiring really good general athletes, especially when you're in a space like tech or like a company like Airbnb where things are constantly changing. Initiatives come up, initiatives get sunsetted. You need people who are flexible and adaptable and can do well in whatever position you put them in. And I think the other thing that I think in my experience of kind of rebuilding the team became very important was just spending time defining roles and responsibilities. Again, because you have a lean team, or maybe you don't have headcount right away, you have to be very efficient in terms of how you're thinking about legal support. And at the same time, clients don't want a bunch of lawyers, a fleet of lawyers in every meeting. They don't like to see that. That was the case at Google. It's still the case at Airbnb. And so it was an opportunity to really like more clearly define roles and responsibilities for my team. And, especially because a lot of the team are product counsel and they function very much like mini GCs for their clients. It's especially important to have clear lines of ownership so that, my team members know exactly what they're responsible for and how they're supporting the business. And then they can take care of helping those clients navigate the rest of the legal department. And so, I think doing that was very important. I think since that initial reorg, I've done several more reorgs at Airbnb, more because, I think not every organization can tolerate like huge change all at once. So sometimes it's important to do it in stages and do kind of baby steps in order to get to the longer term vision that you might have for the team or how you think things should be. And so, and then other things come up that you didn't foresee. I had a team member who was running my marketing and IP team and became the company's diversity and inclusion officer because that was something that they were very passionate about. So I had a major leadership gap to fill, but I used that as an opportunity to consolidate, kind of, further refine alignment in terms of responsibilities. And then, also some of the things happening at the company that have kind of prompted us to always look at how we're structured, how we're set up, all those roles and responsibilities I just talked about is, again, moving to this twice a year product launch cycle. It has changed the way we execute. It's changed the way teams across the company have to work together to deliver on the product roadmap for that launch cycle. The work is increasingly more cross-functional and complex. And so it's even more important to have clear swim lanes. I think the other thing has been changes in how the business is structured and leadership. We now have an organization called the Chief Business Officer kind of org, and they're trying to figure out how to work with product and engineering, et cetera, to really drive the growth of the business. And so how do we support them and how can we provide insights and value to them that help them connect to the rest of the company in terms of driving cross-functional work. And then I think the third thing is international growth. I don't know about, some of the organizations that you're in, and Milana, maybe you have a perspective on this. At Airbnb, there's a strong sort of setup where it's like you have headquarters and you have regional teams, and the regional teams have their own, they're kind of like their own little legal department. If you are a company like ours, where we're really focused on international growth, how my team works with the international teams is going to be increasingly more important. So I have to think about how do we adapt to that priority and make sure that we are creating the smoothest kind of experience of working with legal as possible. We're still working through that, but I think it definitely starts with having people who are very collaborative, communicative, open to, kind of who believe that, working as a team will produce better results. But that is a challenge that I think I'm currently facing, where I have to think about how to adapt the team.
I'll just add that at Reddit, we're still very small. So I am just in the process of hiring my first APAC lawyer. And we have one person in the UK. So we don't have that challenge yet, but we'll get there.
Well, and I think, like I said, I've done a lot of reorgs at Google and Airbnb. And, I think org design is such a key part of what it means to be able to scale legal support. So having the right org design is so important. And I think there's just a couple principles that I've kind of like gone back to again and again in terms of prioritizing them. And I think it's, one, business alignment, always making sure you're kind of supporting the business in the most efficient and scalable way possible. Again, role clarity. I've talked about that. I think it's also for teams like mine that are supporting product launches, finding ways to kind of like consolidate and centralize knowledge is always better than having like 5 different lawyers on one thing. And then, also building in Slack into your system too. I've talked about consolidating, centralizing, but there's fluctuations in volume of work that you will experience. So finding ways to let, like, what type of work can be spread around the team, what kind of work is high volume, and with some training everybody can do it, so that it's not all landing on one person's plate, especially when the volume is going to pick up. I think that's especially true for commercial teams, where teams tend to experience a high volume at end of quarter, right, because of the way the businesses operate. So think about that. And then, what are some opportunities to kind of give folks on the team leadership, thought leadership opportunities? AI, obviously, everybody's talking a lot about that. There was somebody fairly senior on my team where, they'd done everything, and, making them kind of our main AI lawyer has proven to be a great development opportunity for them, but also good for the business too, to have that thought leadership established early on. And so, I think those are some of the things that I've gone back to again and again, and just, also anticipate that things will change. There will be future growth. So you need to have a kind of an approach that, can last, a little while before the next rework. But, I think the more you know about where the business is headed, and the more you understand, going back to what I was talking about, the operating system and how to navigate, the better kind of you can design your team.
Yeah, I agree with all that. So let me just pause for a question that we got. For early stage companies, how do you think about when to bring on a head of legal, and when do you slot them in the org structure? Where do you slot them in the org structure? So I report up to a chief legal officer, Bentley, who also runs the trust and safety, our trust and safety policy team, and our public policy team as well. So that's where I fit into the Reddit org structure. But I think generally, when do you bring on someone to lead the legal team? I think when you have enough work that you can't just rely on outside counsel anymore, where it doesn't make sense from a cost perspective to rely on outside counsel, and you need someone day-to-day to manage your legal work. And I think also more importantly is when you need that strategic legal guidance, that in-house guidance, someone who understands your company really, really deeply and can provide that end-to-end legal guidance. I think I've seen various iterations of reporting structures, like reporting to the CEO, reporting to the COO. There's just various ones, and I've also seen that switch up at companies. All right, so, and definitely feel free to add, if anyone has other questions, feel free to add them to the chat. So we talked about, Iris, about taking your time to understand your team and organizing and building the right team, but how do you prioritize among the many other things you have to do?
Yeah. I think this topic of prioritization is always a good one. I think for those of us who lead product and commercial functions, we're really kind of our priorities are directly tied to supporting the business goals. So for instance, these product launches we do at Airbnb, like those are my top priority. If the business is prioritizing a particular initiative, like I want to make sure that's top of mind for myself and my team, and that the majority of our time is being spent there. But inevitably, there's a lot of day-to-day stuff that has to get done too, aside from that. And, I do think, there are certain processes and systems, et cetera, that you should always be thinking about building in the background in order to ensure that the team can really operate at scale. And I think, those can also have a very significant impact on the business's ability to move quickly and execute. So I think, one great example is always in the commercial space, right? Taking a good hard look at, do you have self-serve tools for the business that can take a lot of the like repetitive, easy to assess kind of questions and issues off your legal team, and have the clients kind of deal with it themselves. I think another resource that you'd be surprised, this was actually something that I brought with me from Google, but because my team was very much like a hub in this kind of hub and spoke model of how we support a lot of the different business initiatives, a lot of other legal team members just didn't know who to go to for questions, or didn't know who to go to with, with issues that they needed help with. And so I just established what we called our POC directory, or point of contact directory, where we literally mapped out everything that we work on, and who's the primary product counsel, commercial counsel, or other lawyer on it. Maybe who's the backup if you have the ability to build some Slack into your system. And you'd be surprised. I think for us, that exercise takes a long time, because you have to figure out a taxonomy for how you think about the business and how that kind of plugs into the legal work, and what different work streams you need to identify that are kind of constants for your team, what kind of thought leadership or expertise is needed. But that's not something that's like a business priority, but it's something that you have to think about and create in order to have folks be able to get information very quickly and identify who's responsible for what very quickly. And that is kind of a great example, I think, of something that I definitely prioritized when I got to Airbnb, and had to keep pushing for in the background while dealing with all the other stuff that the business wanted done.
And you really have to keep pushing at it, because I've tried that too, and with mixed success, because you have it at first, you have that list, great list, or like you can call it a DRI, legal DRI list, but then you have to keep it updated, and that's the part that gets difficult.
Yeah, and I think that and especially when you did as many org changes as I did, like that list became outdated the minute you did that org change. So one tip I have there is I've built in, I live and die by my calendar, and I think my team does too. So we block off like time every quarter to kind of refresh, and I put it on my directs to refresh the list, because they know best the work. And so when it's like broken up into pieces, it's a little easier too, versus like looking at this whole big list and doing it yourself. So I do think if you can set aside the time periodically to do that, it's a worthwhile exercise, and people get a lot of value out of it. So for you, Milana, I'm curious to know like how you thought about prioritization, and where did you focus, especially during your time at Reddit?
Yeah, and by the way, I'm going to take that tip of calendaring the quarterly refresh. That's actually a really great idea. Thanks, Iris. So a few areas that were top of mind for me the first year at Reddit. So commercial scaling, this was the same at Coinbase, like getting organized about what deals we were working on, status and priority. You really, really can't scale without the basics in place on the commercial side. This is critical, especially, Reddit, we're ad supported. And so we had a lot of ads deals. And so this was critical, and figuring out a contracts management solution. So when I got to Reddit, we had one solution, Ironclad, that was in the works, but it was only implemented for some agreements. And I think it's pretty common for private companies not to have a fully implemented or implemented system at all of contracts management. And having a solution like this is critical. And then always important to have a robust deal approval process, especially as a public company, and you have compliance and audit requirements. And then obviously I read it that at the top of the list was public company readiness. And this was a lot of work, lots of homework for me personally, even to understand what to do and get up to speed. As I mentioned previously, I did not have corporate legal or securities background, so I needed to do a lot to ramp up. And this could be, you know, public company readiness and IPO prep could be an entire separate webinar. But I think for me, like, he was really strong outside counsel. We worked with like Latham and Watkins, and also internally relationship with the finance team, because you got to be in lockstep with them. In terms of outside counsel, especially in the last few months before an IPO, you will be working with them basically every day, multiple times a day. So you need to be besties with your outside counsel. Reddit had a really long IPO period. We had previously filed a confidential S1 a couple of years ago, so we weren't starting totally from scratch when we rebooted our process, but updating the S1 obviously was a huge undertaking and a lot of work preparing the board and investors for the IPO as well. And a program management here was key, because there's just so many AIs. I think our outside counsel gave us a list of things we needed to do, and it was like pages long. And you know, we had to get on top of that and have a really strong internal program management for that. And staffing was key here. And I was fortunate to hire some amazing corporate attorneys that were instrumental for me to get over the line. And then one other item for me, especially my first year, was really the litigation challenges. You know, when I started, we had a very manageable docket, and that has ramped up. And, you know, we were anticipating much more volume as a public company. So for us, you know, getting the litigation program management in place to support a ramp up was key. Hiring you know, program manager, litigation program manager, paralegal as well. And again, the whole seeing around corners to anticipate needs was key.
Yeah, I mean, I think the IPO readiness, like, it definitely sounds like a very, like, you're almost like a product manager, like,
Yes.
trying to get this thing launched. You know, the one thing as you were speaking, like, I was reminded of, you know, I've noticed, like, as companies grow, they tend to become more siloed, and they take for granted that sharing information is not easy to do anymore, because not everybody knows each other, right? Like, you suddenly have a lot of different functions involved in things. And information sharing needs to be supported by structure. Otherwise, it will very quickly fall apart the larger the organization gets. And you can't just gather everybody in a meeting together and talk about stuff, especially for those of us in, like, remote working situations. And so, you know, a really effective tool that I know Milana is also a big fan of from our Google days, and that we brought to our organizations, is instituting kind of what we call the weekly report. And this is basically, like, individual team members will report in, they just write these little snippets about what they're working on. And it goes into a report that, you know, I edit and curate, and it goes to my entire team, because again, my team is big enough where not everybody knows what's going on all the time. It goes to the entire legal department. It goes to my boss, our CLO. And then it goes, I've also shared it with my business partners, the leadership on the business side, because, you know, they actually, they're even more siloed, I would just say. Like, they're very focused on the things that they do, and they're not always able to connect the dots. And I think some of those leaders, because of the size of their teams, also don't always know, like, what folks on their team are working on or what stage things are in. And so I will tell you that has been my biggest value add from day one, is that report, in terms of the feedback I've gotten from clients about reading that report. They read it religiously. And then I think for me, it's essential for me to be able to have that, so I can see what's going on, and I can decide, okay, this matter looks like it's bubbling up, and make quick decisions about, like, is this something that needs escalation? Is this something I need to get involved in? right away versus I'll kind of let this one simmer. And the same thing goes for my boss too. Like how does he know what's important? And he learns about a lot of things through the weekly report that I give him. And so, yeah, I can't, I know Milana, I'll kind of stop there.
Yeah, I will be a huge plus one. The first thing I did at both Coinbase and Reddit was implement snippets. And I know there's some snippets haters out there. But I would say it is the easiest thing you can implement when you when you are starting a new role at your company, and it adds such value to everyone. I mean, we face the same challenge at Reddit, in that folks were siloed, didn't really know what they were working on. The feedback I was getting was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't have a lot of insight. And that just helps fix it so much. And I could not, I read it religiously as well. My boss also reads it religiously every week. And we haven't gotten quite to the great cadence of sending it out to clients. We send out one every once in a while to clients, but that's one thing I'm hoping to get better at. Yeah, number one advice for sure.
Yeah. And, one thing I would point out about snippets also is it's very much like you have to get everybody using the same format and kind of like same level of detail and content. So there's actually a lot of work that you have to do up front to kind of build those weekly reports. So I know Milana and I have like created guides for our team on how to write snippets.
Just create a template and put it on LinkedIn for folks.
I know, right? But that guide is actually like several pages long because it also includes examples of the types of snippets to submit and like, what's a good structure. Because that's the other thing that I think a lot of people derive a lot of value out of. I actually had a client say to me, like, these snippets are just the right amount of information for me to know whether it's something I need to get involved in or not. But it's not like so detailed that I get lost in the details too. So, getting that is definitely an art form. I think the other thing that I started thinking about as we were talking about this topic of prioritization is also adding program management capabilities to my team. Because of these product release cycles, the business has their own program managers that are kind of making sure we're hitting all the milestones, the work is on track, et cetera. What are the outstanding issues? How are we going to close them out? And that, each of these launches requires such like tight coordination across many different functions, as well as within legal. Like you might have privacy issues that need to get resolved. You might have other regional considerations that need to be built into how we're dealing with the legal considerations. And so I think I started to realize, from observing what was going on with the team, that a lot of my lawyers who were working on these were spending a lot of time setting up meetings, creating information sharing channels, trying to connect with the business on like what pivots were being made, like what changes were happening to the roadmap, et cetera. And so in order to help them, I hired somebody to serve as like a program manager for these launches that was dedicated to legal. And that person immediately came in, set up like regular meetings, like just created like the infrastructure needed to support these product launches, knowing that we were going to keep doing these again and again. And it has made each launch better and better for us in legal in terms of how we execute. But this person has also become very pivotal to helping drive regulatory compliance work at the company, because they can help mobilize product engineering and other functions to help build the features and make the changes to our systems that are needed to deal with regulations that impact our business, like the Digital Services Act. There's others that are coming up for us where we need the business to kind of like build for legal compliance. And so having that program manager role embedded in the team has been very helpful to kind of create a bridge between legal and the business. So that yeah, if you have questions.
And if I can jump in on that one, I love that idea, but at Reddit we're too small to have as someone dedicated to that. One thing that I've done for different cross-functional projects is to just give this as an opportunity for someone, right? Particularly a more junior legal team member to just play that role as a 10% project, right? For the time being. I think that's a good way of handling those kind of program management when you're not quite big enough to have a dedicated person.
Yeah. Definitely it's a great growth opportunity for folks to do that kind of work too. So I guess in addition to kind of like some of the, designing processes and setting up systems to support the business at scale, I think another key area of focus that I think you and I have both encountered is just making sure you're building the kind of team culture that can support that scale. But how do you do that? And especially when you are working remotely or in a hybrid environment, I think is kind of a very relevant question for a lot of us. So I don't know, Milana, I would love your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think it's really challenging in the remote environment. So there's a few things that I do. One is articulating expectations, both in terms of the what and how, right? And particularly, how do you do client service? I'm meaning internal client service. And I've shamelessly borrowed my approach or articulation of my approach through this guy named Seth Weissman, who used to be Marketa's prior GC. He now, I think, has a coaching business, but he used to be the GC over there. And which boils down to, your team's, my team's service level is delight, like legal service with delight. And I know that sounds hokey, but it actually like really drives home, what we're trying to do. And then I think secondly, like articulating the mission and this is particularly important in a quickly growing company where you have teams that that bump into each other. And at Reddit, we did a mission exercise like fairly early on and came up with a little motto, and I think that's really helpful as well. I think regularly sharing priorities and OKRs is important too. We've gone back and forth. I've gone back and forth on how to do this in some places, and then sometimes, we do it more formally. So the first year I was at Reddit, we had a very formal list of OKRs, and then the feedback was this wasn't quite as helpful. So now we have just a very short kind of statement of here are the things we're trying to focus on aligned with company goals, and here are our major project, and also articulating the why, like why is this important for us to be working on, and why is this important and why is this impactful to the company. And then moving to the remote aspect of it, I think on-sites and or offsites are really important. I regularly have in-office working sessions, also making space for social interactions for the teams to get to know each other and me. And even though I am remote, I feel strongly about showing up in person regularly, and I go down to San Francisco, every 3 or 4 weeks. We have a core group of folks who go in there or go to our New York office, and I try to be there as much as I can.
Yeah, I think building those connections whenever you have the opportunity to be together in person is so crucial. My team has now done like 2 major kind of like offsites. We do them annually, and time and again, the feedback is like less substantive stuff because you can get that done over Zoom very easily. It's more like we want time to get to know each other and build those connections, because I think those lead to smoother communication, like better collaboration, et cetera. But, I think also as a leader, when you're trying to think about like defining your team culture, it's super important to like, again, set those expectations that you have of the team. I fully, I've made it very clear to my team. The point of me putting in place a lot of the things that I've talked about is to ensure that we're delivering consistently high quality advice. Because that can't always just come from me. Otherwise, I end up being the bottleneck, right? If every decision, every piece of guidance has to be run through me, that can't be the way it works. And I need everybody to take ownership of the work that they do, and I want them to have agency as well. but also create like an environment where they have psychological safety and they know that they can take risks, so long as they've done their homework and they've done their homework, right? So, one of the things I would say about, how to build that, that like high accountability, high performance culture for your team is, make sure you have the right training in place. One of the things that we did at Google and I brought to Airbnb was having a boot camp curriculum where there were certain subjects and topics that I knew time and again that the lawyers on my team need to be familiar with in order to be effective counsel. So like privacy 101 or, consumer protection law, like things that I know to be very, very relevant for a large population of my team. And I, designating 2 people on the team to kind of be the owners of that. And we rotate folks who own the curriculum, and are responsible for like, getting people to teach these subjects. Also,
one thing, if I could interrupt there, just for folks, we always also have been trying to do that. I think for smaller legal teams, sometimes getting outside counsel to do that. So that's something I've been doing where we don't have necessarily the expertise in-house, but we need to be doing privacy or content regulation boot camps. So we've been, and usually your outside counsel will be happy to do those. And then you get CLE to boot. So that's another thing to think about.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I know that we've done that too. I think, one thing that's also important is I have, put in writing guidance for my team on my expectations around escalations and how to write effective executive summaries, because that's another way in which you can make sure like folks are taking ownership, that they are helping you be able to kind of function in a way where, again, you're not the bottleneck. And you're holding people accountable for making sure like they're getting you information in a timely way so that you can help them and help get decisions made. And I think the other thing is, I spend a lot of my time talking to leaders across the company to gauge what's important to them, how do they think about risk, and calibrating that. And making sure I bring that back to the team too. And I share with them, like if I've had a conversation with our CLO about something, I want to immediately make sure my team members understand how they're thinking about it, whether they think it's an important one or not. And that knowledge is something that you have to find ways of kind of passing through to the entire team in order for them to start to be able to calibrate risk properly and be attuned to what leadership will care and not care about. So we'll kind of pause there. We're seeing some questions pop up. We have a few minutes to go. Let me see.
What are some good reading or content sources that you like to stay current with legal updates you may need to consider in your business? For me, so one is outside counsel summaries. I read those pretty religiously. Whether it's corporate, whether it's on the content side, I think they're super helpful, and I do that. And then the other one, I listen to podcast. I'm a big fan. I know it's all tech bro, but the All In Pod, so I can know what's going on in Silicon Valley. And then also Eric Goldman's blog. For me, content is very key, so that's really important for me.
Yeah, those are all great resources. I mean, outside counsel are great for that too. They're constantly putting out content about new regulations, so I pay attention to kind of what they're putting out. And then we also, for some of the stuff happening outside the US, our regional teams are really good about kind of putting out digests of things that are happening. And, recently something happened to one of our competitors in EMEA, and the lawyer in EMEA kind of wrote up a summary that came in very handy with some conversations I was in. So, also leveraging your team and kind of the knowledge that they're exposed to and finding ways of passing that around. And for me to kind of like read up on that too has always been a good resource for me.
All right, I think we're getting to the end. All right, should we do some parting words of advice?
Sure. I don't know. Why don't you start, Milana?
Okay, so I've been doing snippets. Go implement it at your company. I think focusing on team building, right, is key. Just is your leadership right? Is your org structure working given, where you are as a company? Do you have the right staffing for now and 6 months from now, right? I think you should constantly be thinking about this and keeping that top of mind, and don't be afraid to make hard decisions, but make sure you're changing them for the right reasons, right? Don't, as I said earlier, don't org around people, but do it because it's the right thing to do for your company. And just be ready to adapt to changing needs.
Yeah,
Yes.
I totally agree. Listen, everybody has a lot of moving pieces that they're dealing with. You're constantly multitasking. But if you don't take the time to kind of zoom out and listen, observe, reflect, kind of what we were saying at the very beginning, when you are dealing with a new challenge, you won't end up with a good outcome, I'm pretty sure. And, build in time for planning throughout that process. And I guess the last thing would be really invest in initiatives that empower your team to operate, smartly, efficiently, and consistent with the expectations and standards that you've set for them. I'm a big believer that, you can't get anything done, without a team these days. So investing in them is really important. But yeah, I see we got a shout out from Tracy about Snippets, so it's good to see. But yeah, that would be my last piece of advice.
All right, Rod.
All right. Wow. What an amazing discussion. Iris, Milana, thank you guys so much. There are so many hidden gems in this call. I learned a ton, and I'm sure the audience members have as well. We covered everything from scaling legal support while juggling headcount gaps, redesigning org structures, snippets. I think that's that's a popular one, and building culture within a remote environment. So I just want to thank you both for taking the time to chat with us. It was really amazing. And to all of our attendees that joined, if you guys would like the event replay and get the key takeaways, sign up for our newsletter at lawtrades.com/newsletter, and we'll shoot that over to you guys probably by tomorrow. So again, thank you, Iris, Milana, for round two of an amazing session. We'd love to have you guys on again. And I'll see everyone at the next one. Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you. Thanks,
Take care,
everyone.
guys. Thank
Bye.
you. All right. Now that we got that out of the way,